In this video, we are going to discuss OpenAI best practices when you are going to push your application to productions. In that, we will cover setting up your organization. So what things you need to consider when you are going to the productions and how you should manage your organizations. Then next, we will go through how we can manage our billing limits for your projects in the productions. We'll also see how we should separate different API keys based on productions or based on the testing, and alongside that we will also see how we can set up like some staging and also some production projects for different purposes when we are going to a staging environment and when we are going to the production environment. And the last thing will be quickly going through how we can scale up our solution architecture. So first, let's see setting up your organization. So when you sign up to the OpenAI API and you log into your OpenAI dashboard, you have a default organization. And if we click on the organization settings, you can see here that we have this organization built with dall, and this organization has a unique key. And then if you want to see the members, you can click on the members. You can go to the billings, the limits. So if you guys have not the other video on the openai-rate-limits, there I have explained all these things in detail. So where you can see your organization, how you can set up multiple projects within an organization. When you are sending requests to the OpenAI API, you can mention your organization. So suppose you are a member of the multiple organizations in the OpenAI platform. When you are sending requests to the OpenAI API, by default OpenAI will consider all those requests for your default organizations. And if you want to send request for some other organization you belong to, you need to pass the organization ID in the request header. And if you want to change your default organizations from the OpenAI dashboard, you can go to the settings. Then you can go to your profile, and under the user API keys, you can see your default organizations here. If you belong to multiple organizations, you can set your default organization from here. And then when you are sending requests to the OpenAI API will pick the default organizations from here. So you have two options, whether you set the default organizations from your profile settings or you set the organization ID in the request header. The other thing is the members. So there are two types of members. One are the readers and the other could be the owners. So when you are adding a new member to your organizations, you can assign two different roles to any member. One is the reader. So in the case of reader, the reader can make API requests. The reader can view basic organization informations. And the reader can also create, update, and delete resources like assistants in the organizations. The other type of member is the owners, and owners have all the permissions of the readers. Like all these three permissions are assigned to the owners, plus they can modify the billing information and they can also manage members within the organizations. Now the next thing is managing your billing limits. When you start using the OpenAI API and you enter to the OpenAI platform, if you don't enter your billing information, you can log into the OpenAI platform, but you cannot use the OpenAI API until you add your billing details. And once you add your billing details, by default you will be approved for the $100 monthly usage, which is set by the OpenAI API, and that limit will increase, including your requests and tokens limits, as you are spending more in that tier. So if you guys have seen the rate limits video, in that video I have explained how the OpenAI usage tier works. Initially you will be in the free tier, and once you spend $5, you will be moved to the usage tier 1, and in the usage tier 1, once you spend $50, you will be moved to the usage tier 2. As you are moving between these tiers, your token and your request limits will be automatically increased. And if you want to, you can also put a monthly limit on your usage, and you can also set a threshold. So when you are spending or reach to a specific number, you will be notified through an email. But for more details, you can refer to this attached video, and there I have explained all these things in much more details. The next best practice for the production is related to the API keys. So as you know that OpenAI API is not free. Once you enter your billing details, you can create your API key for your default organization and your default project. If you have multiple projects within one organization, you can create separate API key for each project. The best practice is that you don't need to put your API key into your source code. You must need to manage your API key through some secrets management, either from your environment variables or from some cloud provided secret managers. And if you are using multiple projects, and for all those projects, since you will be using multiple API keys, in the OpenAI dashboard you can check all your usage details for each API key in the dashboard. So if I go to the usage page and if I click on the activity, I can see here that my top organization is built with dall and my top projects are OpenAI Essentials. So since I have just this one project and I'm sending all the requests against this project and this organization, and here you can see also the API key. So whatever name you give to that API when you are creating it, that name will be appeared here, and you can check your number of requests and how much you have spent for that API key. So this, if you have multiple projects and multiple keys, you can see the detailed report of all those projects and keys inside the OpenAI dashboard. The next practice is very common practice in the web development. So when you are going to the production, before you go to the production and release your product, you first need to set up a staging environment, and you will deploy exactly what you are going to deploy to the production, and then you can even invite some beta users. And once you are good with the staging environment, then you can move it to the production environment. So the same way you can set up two different projects on the OpenAI API, one for staging and one for production. Under the organizations, on the staging you can use the staging API key, and on the production you can use the production API key. So that way you can monitor your staging spendings and monthly usage separately for staging than productions. And in any unexpected case, if the staging key is exposed by some means, your production will still remain safe. If I go to the settings, here I have this one project called OpenAI Essentials, and then I have this other project called Sales. So the same way you can have multiple projects. If I go to the limits, this is my sale projects, and I have not set any monthly budget or notification threshold, and I have not set any rate limits as well. If I go to my OpenAI Essential projects, I have this monthly budget set and also this notification threshold. I have separate limits for tokens and for requests or for different models. If your usage on the staging is limited to some specific users, you can set a desired monthly budget, and you can also set the tokens and request limits for each model separately. The other best practice is scaling up your solution architecture. This is regardless of the OpenAI API. This is a very common practice in the web applications. As the traffic is increasing on your platform, your existing architecture will need to scale up and scale down based on how much traffic you have at a specific point. So there are different options. One is the horizontal scaling. So in the horizontal scaling, you are increasing the number of servers. That could include the number of web servers, the number of database servers, and also any other resources you are using for your infrastructure. The other type is vertical scaling. So in the vertical scaling, instead of increasing the number of servers and machines, you are actually increasing the capacity of those machines and those servers. Then you have the caching. So if you have data that does not change frequently, you can set up a caching mechanism like Redis or Elastic Cache. That totally depends on your use case, but you can set up a cache in front of the web server. So a request going before to the web server and getting the real data, which could take some time to get the fresh data. You can cache all that data and you can serve it to the customer before getting it from the actual system. And then the last thing is the load balancing. So if you have multiple machines in case of horizontal scaling, so you will definitely not need to send all requests to just one machine and the other machine will be remain in the idle state. You definitely need to split all that traffic among all those machines equally. So for that you can set up a load balancing mechanism, and load balancing will split the traffic based on how much each machine is consuming at that specific point. These were some of the best practices, and this doesn't end here. So we have so many other best practices, and that totally depends on how complex and how large your system and infrastructure is. But if you guys are planning to push your platform which is based on the OpenAI API, you can go to the OpenAI documentation here, and you can go through all these best practices here, which includes the streaming. So if you have a response which takes maybe 5 or 10 minutes, so instead of a user waiting for that response, you can use the streaming. So the OpenAI API will return the response in the form of chunks, the way you are seeing in the ChatGPT. When you are talking to the ChatGPT, it doesn't make you wait for the whole response, but instead it start writing the response in the form of stream. The other thing is the infrastructure. So currently the OpenAI infrastructure is located in the United States. If your platform is also located in the United States, it will take less time to reach the OpenAI infrastructure, so that will actually reduce the latency. But if your infrastructure is outside the US, that could increase the latency a little bit. So either you can shift your infrastructure to some cloud residing in the US, but that totally depends on where your end users are located. So in case your end users are mostly based in the UK and you are moving your whole infrastructure to the US, that could make the overall experience a bit slower. The other thing is batching, and batching is used when you don't need the response from the OpenAI immediately. So in case of batch, what you will do is that you will combine all your requests into a single file in the form of batch, and then you will submit that batch of requests to the OpenAI API by starting a background job, and then you need to monitor that job. Once that job is ready and all the requests are processed, you can get all the results from the OpenAI API and go through it to extract individual responses. So I have a separate video on the OpenAI batching request, and there I have explained how the OpenAI batching API works and how it can reduce the cost, and there I have given a practical demo by going through all the steps from combining your request into a batch of file and then at the end getting the results from the OpenAI API. So the list doesn't end here, and we have some other best practices as well, like including MLOps strategy, security and compliance, and then we have safety best practices. So I would recommend to go through this document in detail before you are moving your application to the production based on the OpenAI. In the next video, we are going to discuss and implement OpenAI assistants. If you guys have seen my other video on the OpenAI fine-tuning, we will also see how OpenAI assistants are different than the OpenAI fine-tuning. What could be the use cases when we need to use OpenAI assistants? What could be the use cases when we need to use OpenAI fine-tuning? So we will also go through the differences between these two things, and we will also implement some custom OpenAI assistants with the help of OpenAI Assistants API.